Hey guys, tonight we're descending into the deepest, weirdest, most unsettling corners of human history, the realm of death rituals. I'm talking about everything from sky burials to Viking boat pyres, to those times when your ancestors thought the best way to get to heaven was to be mummified by your own relatives. If you think modern funerals are awkward, just wait. Tonight, we'll explore the moments when humanity stared death in the face and said, "You know what would really spice this up? Dancing skeletons and a couple of skull goblets." But first, if you actually enjoy falling asleep to this stuff, go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me the weirdest thing you've inherited from a family member. Maybe it's a haunted grandfather clock. Maybe it's just anxiety. Either way, I want to know. Dim those lights. Crank up the fan for that soothing white noise. Get comfortable. Maybe wrap yourself up like an Egyptian mummy. But skip the whole remove your brain through your nose bit. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered how you'd be sent off if you'd lived in another era? Would your body be launched into the afterlife on a flaming boat? Would your bones end up displayed in the local church as a stern warning to misbehaving children? Would your ghost be stuck haunting your own kitchen because your relatives forgot to leave you a snack in the grave? If you died in a Viking raid, would they send you off with a 1,000-year-old herring and your least favorite cousin? Would you be honored with coins on your eyes? Or just a bill for the world's weirdest party? And if you could pick, which historical death ritual would you choose? Congratulations! You've just woken up at the dawn of human civilization, where death isn't the end, it's the opening act. Good luck. In the cold, windy heights of Tibet, your journey doesn't end in the ground. It ends with your body being lovingly chopped up and offered to the local vultures. The logic? Let your flesh become part of the sky. Recycling, but with more talons. It's a bit like being on a very exclusive buffet, except you're the main course. Let's set the scene. You've spent your whole life shivering in yak wool, meditating on mountain ledges, and wondering if butter tea is really supposed to taste like that. Now, finally, you get to participate in the ultimate group activity, becoming a sky burial. Congratulations. Your role is both guest of honor and, well, entree. If you've ever feared being the center of attention, this is a solid test of your boundaries. Your relatives gather at dawn, chanting prayers and shuffling nervously, while you, having recently expired, are about to make a very dramatic exit. Unlike most funerals, where the dearly departed gets tucked into the ground or stashed in a fancy box, the Tibetan sky burial is all about not letting anything go to waste. You won't find elaborate tombstones or overpriced floral arrangements here, just a slab of rock on a hilltop, some ritual instruments, and the region's hungriest, most optimistic birds circling overhead, like they've RSVP'd months in advance. The official in charge is called a rogyapa, which loosely translates to body breaker. Try not to take it personally. The logic behind all this? Practicality and spiritual wisdom, hand in severed hand. See, Tibet is not exactly a garden paradise. The soil is too rocky to dig a grave. Firewood for cremation? Scarcer than a polite taxi driver. But most importantly, the Buddhist belief system here emphasizes generosity, giving, even in death, your body back to the world. For the Tibetan people, your last act isn't just to disappear, it's to nourish the living, even if those living are 8-foot wingspans and have names like the Bone Crusher. You might imagine this as a lonely, somber process. Far from it. It's a communal affair. Your family, your friends, your favorite monk, and a squadron of nervous yaks all trek up the hill at sunrise. There are prayers, chants, smoke wafting through the air. The rogyapa sharpens his knives with the same seriousness you bring to slicing a particularly stubborn loaf of bread. If you had any worries about your post-mortem dignity, now's a good time to let them go. The rogyapa gets to work, efficiently preparing you for the main event. It's not delicate, it's not subtle, but it is, in its own way, an act of compassion and ultimate generosity. And then, as the sun rises and the wind howls, the vultures descend. Himalayan griffons, massive birds with wingspans bigger than your mattress, gather in a flurry of feathers. There is no hesitation. They land, shuffle, and dig in with gusto, like it's Thanksgiving and you're the only turkey. It sounds grisly, but to the Tibetan people, this is the height of respect, ensuring nothing is wasted, and the soul is released from the body as quickly as possible. The body, after all, is just a temporary vessel, a soon-to-be empty taxi on its last fare. What does it feel like for the onlookers? There's reverence, not revulsion. You're returning to nature, becoming part of the cycle. The vultures, for their part, do a very thorough job. Within an hour, there's barely anything left except a few clean bones and the occasional feather, which is more than can be said for most modern buffet tables. Any remaining bones are crushed and offered up as well. Truly zero waste. Centuries before it was cool. So the next time you hear the phrase food for thought, just remember, some people took it literally. In the high passes of Tibet, your final act is to become a bridge between earth and sky, a donation to nature, a gift to the hungry, and a reminder that in the end, we all return to the circle. Rest easy. You've gone out with a view, a breeze, and the best seat in the house, at least until the vultures move in. Ancient Egypt, the land of pyramids, gods, and people with a real thing for linen bandages. Your send-off? An elaborate process that starts with yanking your brain out through your nose and ends with you wrapped like a spring roll, ready for the afterlife, eternal comfort, provided you don't mind being a dehydrated raisin forever. Let's drift gently back to the hot, sandy banks of the Nile, where you, a reasonably successful ancient Egyptian, have just completed your time on Earth, hopefully without being eaten by a crocodile or cursed by a minor deity. Unlike some cultures that rush you straight into the earth, your Egyptian journey is just getting started. You're about to become the star attraction in a multi-day spa treatment that puts every modern wellness retreat to shame, provided you're into extreme exfoliation. It starts with a team of professional embalmers. Think of them as the ancient world's mortuary day spa staff, but with less cucumber water and a lot more natron and natural salt mixture, perfect for turning your organs into ancient jerky. They greet you in the beautiful house, which is much less glamorous than it sounds. It's more like a desert-side workshop, part hospital, part sausage factory, all optimism. Now comes the part you probably didn't plan for. Brain extraction. If you've ever had a sinus infection, you're already halfway there. A metal hook is carefully threaded up through your nostril and wiggled with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for fishing out stray charger cables. Your brain gets mashed, liquefied, and then poured out, sort of like cleaning out an old pumpkin, except it's you. And before you ask, no, they didn't keep the brain. Egyptians believed it wasn't that important. The heart? Absolutely vital. The brain? Toss it. Some ancient priorities never change. After the brain, it's time for the rest of your organs. Embalmers make a polite incision along your left side and remove your lungs, liver, stomach, and intestines. These get individually cleaned, dried, and stored in special jars, canopic jars, each guarded by a different minor god who, frankly, has seen it all before. The heart stays in place, because the afterlife bureaucracy requires it for judging whether you've been a good person or just spent too much time yelling at servants. Your kidneys? Also left behind. Nobody's perfect. Now you're hollow, a little lighter, and ready for the full spa experience. You get a thorough rinse inside and out, then packed with natron for a solid 40 days, ancient Egypt's answer to low and slow. You are, essentially, being made shelf-stable. Modern people pay for a tan. You get to be sandblasted until not even a beetle wants a bite. As the weeks drag on, the embalmers stop by to check your progress. Picture being checked on by someone's very nosy great-aunt, except she's judging your dehydration levels. At last, you're ready to come out of the salt. Your skin is leathery, your cheeks sunken, but you're still not done. Now it's time to get stuffed, literally. The embalmers fill you with sawdust, resin-soaked linen, and sometimes even onions, all to restore your dignified, alive-ish shape. It's a little like being prepared for an open casket funeral by someone who once saw a human in a book. Next, the main event, the wrapping. Your embalmers unspool yards and yards of linen, each strip dipped in sticky resin, then lovingly wrapped around every part of your body, from head to toe. Fingers and toes are each wrapped individually, just in case you need them for any afterlife piano lessons. Prayers are recited, amulets tucked in, and sometimes a golden mask is laid over your face, if you had the cash. Otherwise, you get the economy class mask, possibly made of painted plaster. You end up looking like a cross between a burrito, a piñata, and someone who took cosplay just a little too far. Now for the grand finale, the burial. You're nestled in a coffin, sometimes 3, Russian doll style, and placed in a tomb filled with grave goods, food, drink, little statues of servants who will do all your chores for you, and enough makeup for a lifetime of eternity. Why so much stuff? Because the Egyptian afterlife is basically a cosmic job fair, and you don't want to show up empty-handed. All told, it's a send-off unlike any other. Sure, you're missing a few organs and your brain is somewhere in the sand, but you're ready for eternity, surrounded by comfort, bling, and the lingering scent of ancient onions. It's not a bad gig, if you can stand the dryness. If you die a true Viking, you don't just get a coffin, you get a whole boat, set on fire and shoved out to sea. It's like a New Year's bonfire, but with more swords and definitely more dramatic shouting. Also, hope you enjoy the smell of burning herring. Let's picture the scene. You've spent your life pillaging, raiding, growing an impressively tangled beard, and surviving on dried fish and mead. You've finally kicked the bucket, ideally not in battle with a sheep, but with sword in hand, reputation intact, and at least some of your own teeth left. For most cultures, the question after death is wood or stone. For Vikings, it's rowboat or warship, because nothing says, I lived large, like being sent off to Valhalla with your own flaming cruise ship. The day of your funeral arrives. The whole village turns out. Relatives, friends, enemies, just to check. And the local bard who's absolutely going to exaggerate your best stories for generations. The cold Scandinavian air is buzzing with excitement. You're loaded onto a longship, yes, an actual boat, because apparently the afterlife has strict baggage requirements and you're going to need everything you ever owned, plus a few of your favorite livestock. Now, this isn't just about you getting a nice nap on the fjord. It's a spectacle. Everyone's in their finest animal pelts, and your ship is decked out with shields, weapons, food, and whatever loot you didn't already spend on ale. There's a full-on tailgate party happening. Mead is flowing, stories are flying, and for once nobody's worried about being raided because everyone who'd do it is at the party. The only one not having fun? Probably your horse, who's eyeing the proceedings nervously. Before you set sail for the afterlife, there's a little something called grave goods. Vikings believed you needed stuff to get through the next world, kind of like being buried with your phone, charger, snacks, and a weapon, just in case there's an afterlife Wi-Fi outage or a troll ambush. For the truly legendary, you might even get servants or a favorite concubine sent along with you. For everyone else, it's the ancient Scandinavian version of take only what you can carry. Now, here comes the fun part. Your ship is dragged to the shore or set afloat on a river, piled high with treasures, food, and occasionally a suspiciously annoyed chicken. Then, the village's best archer steps up, probably the same guy who once shot a bear out of a tree or, more likely, missed every shot during last year's boar hunt. His job? To fire a flaming arrow onto the ship and set your entire floating life on fire. Sometimes it takes one try, sometimes several. There's nothing quite as humbling as your grand send-off fizzling because someone forgot to check if the wood was dry. Finally, the flames catch. Your ship blazes, crackling and popping, smoke rising to the sky. Everyone stands on the shore, watching your boat, your entire afterlife starter pack, burn its way toward Valhalla. It's beautiful, epic, and a little terrifying. If you ever worried about leaving a mark, don't. Your final act is visible for miles, and you're the literal torchbearer for every Viking who ever dreamed of a dramatic exit. Of course, not everyone got a ship burial. They were expensive, time-consuming, and, honestly, there's only so much driftwood to go around. More humble Vikings were buried with boat-shaped stones, or simply given a good send-off on land, minus the fire hazard. But in saga and song, it's always the ship that sticks. The image of a flaming longboat, sword at your side, heading off into the mist. This is what immortality looks like, at least until someone at the afterlife feast asks you how you really died. And you have to admit it was gored by an angry sheep. The boat sinks, the flames die, and your friends go home, hopefully not followed by the local wildlife attracted by the smell of smoked herring. You've gone out in style, Viking style. No headstone, no solemn silence, just the wildest bon voyage party history ever invented. Rest easy. You've earned it, and you'll never have to smell herring again, unless Valhalla has a very weird menu. In historical India, being a widow sometimes meant joining your late husband on his funeral pyre. Voluntarily. Voluntarily. Nothing says romance like a retirement plan involving open flames and heavy gold jewelry. Let's set the scene. You're a high-caste woman in a small Indian village centuries ago, married off in your teens and living in a world where your husband's health is as unpredictable as the monsoon. When he eventually shuffles off this mortal coil, maybe from illness, maybe from eating street food you warned him about, you suddenly find yourself in the running for the most dramatic goodbye in history. Sati. Forget Hallmark cards. Here, love is measured not in roses or chocolates, but by how many bangles you wear on your last walk. The family home transforms from a place of daily routine to the center of a bustling, anxious crowd. Relatives arrive in droves, some genuinely grieving, others just nosy. Local priests busy themselves reciting Sanskrit verses, the neighbors whisper, and you're placed at the center of attention in a way no one really wants. The house fills with the smell of incense, marigold flowers, and dread. People start talking about honor, purity, tradition, basically everything except your opinion. You, meanwhile, are told that your destiny is to demonstrate the ultimate devotion by becoming one with your spouse through fire. Now, tradition says this is an act of ultimate wifely loyalty, an honor, a ticket to a noble afterlife for both of you. If you're particularly pious, maybe you even believed in it. If not, well, let's just say voluntary is doing a lot of heavy lifting. There's social pressure, community expectation, and, depending on your in-laws, the world's least subtle pep talk. Your gold jewelry? It's not just for looks. It's considered part of the offering. Because if you're going out draped in enough precious metal to make a dragon jealous. The big day arrives, and it's part solemn ritual, part spectacle. The funeral pyre is stacked high with logs and sandalwood, ready for its dual act. Villagers gather as if attending the season's hottest event, if the event included intense peer pressure and a strong chance of spontaneous combustion. Priests chant, conch shells sound, and you're dressed in your finest silk sari, face adorned with vermilion and elaborate makeup. You're supposed to walk calmly to the pyre, eyes serene, heart full of spiritual courage. If you falter, there's always someone nearby to encourage you along. Sometimes encouragement came in the form of words, sometimes a firm grip. Because, of course, nothing says free will like needing an entourage to keep you from changing your mind at the last second. At this point, you might be thinking, was this actually common? The answer is both yes and no. Sati was never the standard fate for all widows, but it happened enough, and with enough drama, to make it a fixture in the colonial imagination, to inspire poets, and to horrify British officials. There were even tales of widows leaping willingly into the flames, cheered on by crowds who considered it the height of spiritual achievement. Other stories, less advertised, feature women who resisted, tried to escape, or, heartbreakingly, did not go gently. In all cases, the result was the same. The flames consumed the couple, and the ashes were gathered for scattering in the holy river. The rationale behind Sati was wrapped in layers of religious philosophy, family politics, and, let's be honest, a convenient way to keep inheritance disputes simple. Widows were seen as unlucky, sometimes even dangerous. Best to send them off with their husbands than have them hang around, reminding everyone of death, and worse, potentially asking for their share of the family fortune. And so, what was sold as a glorious reunion in the afterlife often boiled down to a medieval HR policy. When in doubt, blame tradition. Still, the ritual's defenders insisted that Sati brought honor and peace to the family, ensured your place in heaven, and helped you avoid the so-called shame of widowhood. As for comfort, let's just say, between the searing flames and public scrutiny, Sati made sure no one in town slept well for weeks. Thankfully, Sati was outlawed in the 19th century, though the legend lingers, along with the collective sigh of relief from every widow who just wanted to retire in peace, maybe pawn a little jewelry, and not become history's hottest romantic gesture. So next time you hear the phrase "love you to death," remember, in historical India, some people took that very, very literally. 19th century Britain turned death into an event. You get a dress code, a shopping list, and maybe a hair brooch made from Aunt Mabel's actual hair. If you thought your family was extra, wait until you see the Victorians spending their life savings on jet black hats and commemorative teacups. Let's dim the gas lights and tiptoe into the parlour, where Queen Victoria herself is still setting the tone for everyone's grief. It's 1865, and someone has just died, probably an uncle you barely knew, or perhaps a family dog with its own legal will. You might think death is supposed to be sad and dignified. Wrong. For Victorians, it's also a competitive sport. The goal? To out-mourn the neighbours with a black wardrobe, at least 3 handkerchiefs per person, and an emotional range somewhere between Hamlet and A Rainy Tuesday. First up, the wardrobe overhaul. Forget your favourite pastel dress or that dashing blue waistcoat. The entire family must go into sartorial lockdown, head-to-toe black for women, sombre dark suits for men, and even the kids get pressed into black frocks like tiny, confused undertakers. Mourning clothes aren't optional. They're non-negotiable, and in the strictest houses, you could be in black for up to 2 years, depending on how close you were to the deceased. Lose a parent? Sorry, that's at least a year in deep mourning. Lose a cousin's husband's neighbour's fishmonger? Maybe just a discreet black ribbon. But it's not just clothes. The Victorians turned shopping for mourning accessories into an Olympic event. You'd need jet black jewellery, often made from actual jet, a fossilised wood that's as brittle as the national mood, and mourning veils so long and opaque you could probably rob a bank and no one would notice. Even shoes, gloves, and undergarments had to match. Fashion magazines published the latest in grief, chic, and society ladies judged one another not by the cut of their dress, but by the authenticity of their gloom. And then there's the truly extra stuff: mourning stationery, mourning bedspreads, black-edged handkerchiefs for those delicate, well-timed tears. And if you wanted to show real commitment, you'd commission a mourning brooch containing a lock of the dearly departed's hair, braided and mounted behind glass. Yes, it's as creepy as it sounds. Victorian scrapbooking at its most unsettling. Some families even collected entire albums of hair art, featuring intricate floral designs made from Uncle Charles's moustache. Don't look too closely at that wreath above the fireplace. Of course, mourning wasn't just for show. There were rules, strict, labyrinthine, and policed by gossipy neighbours and etiquette guides the size of a small encyclopedia. When could you leave the house? How long should your veil be? When was it acceptable to crack a smile? Never. Unless you're remembering how much worse it was when Aunt Agnes died of gout. There was an etiquette to everything. How many tears to shed, how to receive condolences, and the correct angle at which to stare out the rain-streaked window and sigh. But death in Victorian Britain wasn't just about individual sorrow, it was also about industry. Entire businesses sprang up to meet the needs of mourners, mourning dressmakers, specialized undertakers, florists selling funeral wreaths for all budgets. There were catalogues for mourning, jewelry, hair art, black stationery, and of course, tea sets designed for those endless condolence visits. The local postman could make an extra shilling just delivering funeral cards and invitations to wakes. Even photographers got in on the act, offering post-mortem portraits, one last family photo, complete with the deceased propped up among the living and, occasionally, with their eyes painted open. It was all part of a booming grief economy, where every tear could be monetized and every loss deserved a receipt. Did it help anyone actually feel better? Probably not. But at least you could point to your black-clad weeping family and say, "See? We cared. Look at our matching jet cufflinks and this tasteful brooch full of hair." Eventually, the endless parade of black crepe and teacups would give way to something like normal life. The veils would be shortened, the dresses re-dyed, and someone would sneak in a little purple or grey. Still, for the Victorians, mourning wasn't just a phase. It was a statement, a lifestyle, and occasionally a full-time job. So next time you're overwhelmed by modern wedding planning, just remember, there was once a time when planning a funeral required its own Pinterest board, 6 shopping trips, and possibly a hair sample. Mourning, Victorian style. The only time being extra was a family obligation. Sometimes, the afterlife calls for a little more enthusiasm. Mayan death rituals weren't just about you, they were about pleasing the gods. And by pleasing, I mean removing your still beating heart while everyone cheers. No pressure. Let's set the scene. You wake up in a lush Central American jungle, birds chirping, the smell of corn tortillas in the air, and the faint sound of drums. You're not just living in Mayan civilization, you're about to become the main event. Congratulations. You're not just dying for yourself, you're dying for everyone. The crops, the rains, the sun, the city's sports team, all of it might hinge on your willingness to go out with a bang. And when I say bang, I mean, well, let's just say you'll never look at chest compressions the same way again. The stakes are high. The Mayan cosmos is a complex place, bursting with gods who are talented, easily offended, and prone to scheduling natural disasters if they don't get enough attention. Forget about sending flowers here. A thank you means offering something that really shows you care, like, say, your own vital organs. And so, the festival day arrives. The whole community gathers, nobles in feathered headdresses, priests painted in blue, and everyone else jockeying for a good view of the pyramid steps. There's music, food, and an uncomfortable sense that things are about to get real. The chosen sacrifice, maybe a captured enemy, maybe a local volunteer with a questionable understanding of the contract, is led up the towering steps. If you're the lucky winner, you get painted, garlanded, and sometimes even given a last meal. Not quite a steak dinner and Netflix, but in ancient Mesoamerica, it's the thought that counts. Once at the top, you're laid across a special stone altar, a surprisingly ergonomic piece of architecture, considering its purpose. 4 burly assistants hold you down. The priest, who's had a lot of practice, and hopefully washed his hands, steps up with an obsidian knife. No, it's not surgical steel, but obsidian is sharp enough to make a modern scalpel jealous. In one swift motion, he opens your chest and lifts your still beating heart to the sky. Cue the crowd. People gasp, priests chant, and the gods, allegedly, smile. But wait, there's more. Sometimes, the ritual calls for a little post-op pageantry. Your heart might be burned as an offering or placed in a special bowl, your blood sprinkled down the temple steps as a literal red carpet. If you're especially important, your body could be rolled down the stairs, a final dramatic exit that puts any Hollywood stunt to shame. Ancient critics gave it 5 stars for spectacle, 1 star for comfort. So why all this effort? For the Maya, blood was life, the ultimate gift. Sacrifice wasn't just about fear or control, it was a cosmic transaction, a way of keeping the world in balance. Rain for the crops, you give a heart. Victory in war? Here. Have a few captives. Good harvest? More hearts, please. Even kings participated in smaller-scale sacrifices, offering their own blood from tongues, ears, or other body parts you really don't want pierced without anesthesia. If you think this all sounds extreme, you're not alone. Spanish conquistadors and later historians found the ritual horrifying and fascinating in equal measure. But for the Maya, it was as ordinary as going to church, just with a lot more screaming and less casserole. And let's be honest, as a spectator sport, it beat watching reruns of the local ball game. Speaking of which, sometimes the losers of the sacred ball game became the next lucky sacrifices. Talk about sudden death overtime. Afterwards, the community feasts, parties, and heads home with a renewed sense of cosmic security. You, meanwhile, have gone to the afterlife with VIP status. And your family gets a lifetime of, "My cousin was a heart donor." Literally, stories. So the next time you fret about public speaking or being the center of attention, spare a thought for the ancient Maya, where being chosen really was a heartfelt honor. In ancient Europe, your grave wasn't a solo act. You, your neighbors, and probably your enemies all get to hang out in the same underground chamber forever, like an eternal slumber party, but colder and with more skeletons. So let's dim the torchlight and shuffle into the past, way, way past. Imagine it's 4500 BCE. You're living somewhere soggy and green in ancient Britain, and you've finally kicked the Stone Age bucket. No graveyard full of neat little rows here. Instead, you're getting a front row spot in the hottest new housing trend. The Long Barrow, a giant earth mound that doubles as communal housing for the dead. It's the original open concept design, but with even less privacy. Your family and friends wrap you up, maybe with a bit of care, maybe with whatever's handy, and carry you up the hill to your final address. A huge stone and earth structure that looks a bit like an overachieving molehill. These barrows aren't small. They're big enough to fit an entire village, or at least everyone in it, eventually. The entrance is a narrow stone passage, sometimes blocked by a giant rock, like a very stubborn doorstop. Inside, it's pitch black, cool, and echoey. It's the kind of place you'd expect to meet either a ghost, a druid, or a really confused sheep. But the fun doesn't stop with you. Over the years, more and more people join you. Relatives, neighbors, distant cousins who definitely overstayed their welcome. You don't get your own room. Instead, bodies are laid out side by side, bones mingling together over time. Archaeologists have found skeletons in all sorts of positions, and sometimes even a skull or two that rolled to the wrong corner during a particularly enthusiastic winter. The boundaries of personal space? Non-existent. If you're lucky, you might be sent off with a few personal items, flint tools, a favorite pot, maybe a chunk of deer antler. Nothing fancy, just the Neolithic equivalent of comfort objects. Don't expect gold or jewelry, those come much later. The early Europeans kept it practical. And honestly, who needs bling when you're surrounded by 100 of your closest friends for all eternity? The burial mound isn't just a dumping ground for bodies, it's the spiritual heart of the community. The living would visit to make offerings, perform rituals, or just pay their respects. Need some extra luck for the harvest? Better check in with the ancestors. Want to solve a neighborly dispute? Why not get a second opinion from Uncle Thag's femur? These chambers weren't sealed off forever. Sometimes bones were taken out and passed around at ceremonies because nothing spices up a party quite like a surprise femur. And then there's the location. These mounds were built to last and placed where everyone could see them, on hilltops, beside rivers, standing proud against the landscape. Each mound was a constant reminder that you weren't alone, even when you very much wanted to be. The ancestors were always watching, always, even when you were just trying to sneak a nap. But there's another side to all this togetherness. Imagine drifting off to sleep every night, knowing your future is an eternity in a crowded stone chamber with people you may or may not have liked. Every squabble, every unresolved grudge, every ancient rivalry, locked in, literally, for thousands of years. Eternal rest? More like eternal awkwardness. The burial mound era eventually faded as new ideas about death and personal space took hold, but the mounds themselves are still with us. Tourists visit, archaeologists poke around, and sheep graze quietly on top, completely unaware of the party happening just beneath their hooves. So next time you worry about being lonely in the afterlife, remember the Neolithic solution. Pack everyone in, mix the bones, and never spend a night alone again. It's cozy, it's communal, and, yes, it's just a little bit creepy. But at least you'll never have to worry about finding a +1 for eternity. Zoroastrians in Persia didn't mess around with earth or fire. They built special towers of silence, where the dead were left on a stone platform for nature to do its thing. No dirt, no flames, just you, the sun, and the world's hungriest birds. Let's drift back to the scorching plains and sun-bleached mountains of ancient Persia. You're a Zoroastrian, one of the world's oldest monotheists, with a religion so obsessed with purity that your afterlife plans look like the strictest recycling policy ever invented. For you and your community, death isn't just the end. It's a dangerous moment where your body, now full of nasty death stuff, could pollute everything it touches. The earth? Sacred. The fire? Even more sacred. Water? Only for the living, thank you very much. So what's left? Air and stone, and a rooftop dining experience for the local avian population. The big day arrives, and it's less about hushed prayers and more about logistics. Your body, scrubbed and wrapped in plain white cloth, is carried by professional corpse bearers up a winding path to the Dakhmar, better known as the Tower of Silence. It's a big, circular stone structure, usually perched on a lonely hill, with the kind of panoramic view that would make any real estate agent swoon. There's no roof, no walls, and definitely no attempt at privacy. Just you, a handful of other recent arrivals, and the endless sky. At the top, the body bearers lay you out on a stone platform, organized by tradition, men on one side, women on another, children in a smaller section. It's the world's least exclusive VIP lounge, and nobody here is making small talk. Instead, the focus is on efficiency and keeping the sacred elements untainted. There are no speeches, no eulogies, no flowers or photographs. If you thought funerals were awkward, try being left out in the open air, fully exposed, while your relatives respectfully avert their eyes and the birds do absolutely no such thing. Because here's where things get feathery. Zoroastrian belief holds that once the soul leaves the body, what's left behind is just a shell that, if buried or burned, would contaminate earth, fire, or water. But if you let nature take its course, you're actually helping to keep the world clean. Enter the vultures, professional-grade recyclers, circling above with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for free appetizers at a wedding. Within hours, they descend, and your body vanishes faster than the snacks at a family reunion. The process is, admittedly, a little intense. Vultures are efficient, nature's best clean-up crew. In a few short hours, the bones are stripped clean and left to bleach in the relentless sun. It sounds grisly, but to the Zoroastrians, it's an act of compassion for both the living and the earth. Your bones, once all that remains, are swept into a central pit, where they crumble and, over time, return to the natural world without polluting the holy elements. Meanwhile, your family waits below, perhaps offering prayers and hoping that your journey is swift. There's no grave to visit, no ashes to scatter, just the memory of a life and the satisfaction that you've left the world just as clean as you found it. In a society where purity is everything, this is the ultimate send-off. You're not weighed down by stone markers, and no one has to weed your plot every spring. Instead, your legacy is keeping the sacred earth unspoiled and giving a free meal to creatures that truly appreciate it. the Towers of Silence are a quiet testament to the lengths people will go to honor their beliefs and keep their planet tidy. Even today, a few still stand, stark and solitary, reminders of a faith that put nature first, centuries before it was cool. So next time you rinse out a yogurt tub for recycling, just remember, somewhere, a Zoroastrian ancestor is nodding in solemn approval. And you thought your HOA was strict. For ancient Celts, the head was the soul's house. So why not keep Grandma's head around for a while? Maybe display it on a shelf, maybe use it as a cup. Talk about never letting go. Let's set the scene. You're in Iron Age Europe, the misty land of the Celts, a people with a taste for gold, an appreciation for heroic poetry, and, apparently, a real knack for home decor with a twist. In your world, the soul is believed to live in the head. That makes your noggin the spiritual equivalent of a 5-bedroom bungalow. And when you shuffle off this mortal coil, your family isn't just going to let that valuable real estate rot in the dirt. No, your head is about to embark on its own posthumous adventure. Imagine you've died gloriously, maybe in battle, maybe from slipping on a very aggressive sheep. Either way, your clan is ready to honor you. The first order of business? Head removal. It sounds dramatic, and it is, but don't worry, you're not alone. Your head will soon be keeping company with other family favorites, famous warriors, and possibly that one annoying neighbor nobody liked but couldn't ignore. The Celts were famous for collecting heads, not just as war trophies, but as treasured mementos. Archaeologists have found shrines packed with skulls, some proudly displayed on wooden shelves, others embedded in the actual walls. You might have been a nobody in life, but in death, your head could become a load-bearing member of the community. The process didn't stop at simple storage. Sometimes your head was treated with a bit of flair, cleaned, polished, and even decorated. In some tales, the best heads were dipped in resin and mounted on stakes outside the house like spiritual scarecrows. If you were especially important, your skull might even be turned into a ceremonial drinking vessel. Yes, nothing says family heirloom quite like a goblet that used to be Great Uncle Fergus. It's not just about intimidation, though that's certainly a side effect. Having a collection of enemy heads on display let everyone know you meant business. Imagine coming home late and seeing your rival's skull grinning from the mantelpiece. It's the ultimate medieval version of "don't mess with us." For guests, it was an icebreaker. Whose head is that? For intruders, a not-so-subtle warning, you could be next. Of course, the head cult wasn't only about warfare. For the Celts, the skull also symbolized wisdom, power, and protection. Sometimes, heads of ancestors were kept close to safeguard the family or even to seek a little post-mortem advice. Should we plant barley this year? Let's ask Grandma. She's right over there by the fire. Archaeologists have uncovered burial sites where the living and the dead really did keep in touch. Pits filled with skulls, sometimes arranged lovingly, sometimes stacked like the world's weirdest game of Jenga. If you're imagining a house full of heads getting a little crowded, you're not wrong, but the Celts didn't see it as creepy. They saw it as continuity. Life and death mingled in the same space, and nobody blinked if you spent the evening chatting with a particularly wise skull. It was comforting in a slightly macabre way, eternal togetherness, family loyalty with a bit more bone involved. And let's not forget the fashion statements. Some Celtic warriors were known to string the heads of their enemies onto their horses' bridles, riding into town with a grisly parade of bad decisions. You can't buy that kind of street cred. In later centuries, Roman writers visiting Celtic lands were both horrified and a little jealous. No one in Rome was using Aunt Tullia's head as a cup holder. Eventually, as Christianity spread and customs changed, the head cult faded, leaving behind only tales, a few well-travelled skulls, and a reputation for parties that never really ended, just became quieter. The next time you see a decorative vase or a trophy shelf, remember, you're only a couple of steps away from some good, old-fashioned Celtic ancestor appreciation. So if you ever wonder what to do with Grandma's ashes, just know the Celts already thought of a solution. It's personal, practical, and always keeps your ancestors close, sometimes a little too close for comfort. Early humans sometimes decided the best way to honor you was, well, to eat you, out of respect, of course. It's recycling, it's ritual, and it's a real conversation starter at parties. So, who brought the finger food? Let's travel way back, before the first cities, before written language, back to a time when dinner invitations came with the caveat, no bones about it. You're part of a tight-knit tribe, living in a world where survival is less meal planning and more try not to starve this week. The land is wild, the winters are cold, and every calorie counts. Now, when someone in your group dies, it's a big deal, and not just because you're down a member for next week's mammoth hunt. Enter cannibalism, the ancient practice with the worst PR in history. But this wasn't the cartoonish, villainous act pop culture later made it out to be. In many prehistoric societies, cannibalism had a sacred, even loving purpose. When a loved one passed, it was sometimes considered the height of respect and closeness to consume their flesh. The reasoning was surprisingly wholesome. Why let a perfectly good ancestor go to waste in the dirt when they could literally become part of the living family? You are what you eat has never been so literal or so awkward at family reunions. The process itself was ritualized. This wasn't just a Tuesday night, what's for dinner situation. There were ceremonies, chants, sometimes even special stone tools reserved for the occasion. Everyone in the community participated, sharing the meal and the memory. Archaeologists have found ancient bones with cut marks, burned spots, and even signs of marrow extraction, all pointing to a meal that was about more than just hunger. It was about transformation, connection, and keeping the tribe together, body and soul. Of course, there was a practical side too. If you lived in an Ice Age tundra, finding fresh meat was tough. Sometimes, even with the best intentions, the line between ritual and pragmatic got blurry. But in many cases, prehistoric cannibalism was reserved for special occasions, honoring elders, ensuring the wisdom of the group literally lived on, or even sending off fallen warriors with the ultimate group hug. It was all about respect, not just survival, though it definitely didn't hurt that you were saving on funeral expenses. Naturally, there were variations. Some groups believed eating the flesh transferred strength, bravery, or wisdom. Others thought it was the best way to protect the soul from wandering off. Occasionally, the bones would be cleaned, painted, and kept as relics, a sort of prehistoric family photo album, only with more calcium and fewer awkward smiles. If you're feeling squeamish, you're not alone. Even among ancient humans, there was debate about where to draw the line. Was it okay to eat the neighbor, or just immediate family? Should you serve Uncle Og with berries, or just plain? Over time, as farming, settlements, and, actual bread became available, these rituals faded out, replaced by burial, cremation, and the world's slowest march toward modern mortuaries. Still, the idea lingered. Stories of ancestral cannibalism survived in myths and legends, whispered by firelight to scare the children or to explain why Grandpa's femur was painted with red ochre. And every so often, a new archaeological discovery pops up. Bones with telltale marks, evidence of ancient feasts, and a reminder that the line between ritual and roast dinner was a lot thinner than we think. So next time you worry about not bringing enough to a potluck, just remember, your prehistoric ancestors had a plan for everything, right down to the last bone. Waste not, want not, though maybe skip this one for your next dinner party. Some traditions really are best left in the Stone Age. Medieval Europe had a bone problem, not enough space, way too many bodies. Solution? Build catacombs and ossuaries where the bones of the dead became architectural features. Finally, interior decorating for Goths. Let's tiptoe through the mists of medieval Europe, where life was hard, death was frequent, and churchyards were about as crowded as a holiday sale at the local market. The problem? The population kept dying. sometimes from plagues, sometimes from wars, sometimes from thinking turnip soup was a food group, and the cemeteries were running out of elbow room. By the 12th century, the situation had gotten so out of hand that even the most optimistic gravedigger had to admit there were just too many bones and not enough dirt. Enter the ossuary, a storage solution that makes IKEA look like amateurs. Ossuaries, from the Latin word for bone box, were purpose-built for the bony overflow. The idea was simple: dig up the old graves, keep the skulls and long bones, and stack them artfully somewhere out of the way. The result? Rooms and tunnels packed floor to ceiling with femurs, tibias, and the occasional skull with a suspiciously judgmental expression. Suddenly, medieval Europe became the world's first open-concept, bone-forward design movement. One of the most famous examples is the Sedlec ossuary in the Czech Republic. Imagine walking into a small chapel, expecting solemn religious vibes, only to find chandeliers made of pelvises, skull garlands, and a coat of arms built entirely out of human bones. It's a little bit holy sight, a little bit Halloween party gone rogue. Priests claimed it reminded everyone of their own mortality. But let's be honest, it was also a practical way to deal with an endless supply of leftover humans. The process was almost industrial. Every few decades, old graves were exhumed, often to make space for new arrivals or to clear land for church renovations. The bones were carefully cleaned, sorted, and relocated to the ossuary. It was the medieval equivalent of spring cleaning, except with a lot more calcium and a lot less Febreze. In some places, monks or artisans got creative, turning piles of bones into intricate patterns, stacking skulls into perfect pyramids, or lining corridors with carefully arranged femurs. Every ossuary had its own style. Some were neatly organized, others leaned into chaos, and a few just looked like the afterlife's lost and found closet. But it wasn't all aesthetics. Ossuaries had a spiritual purpose too. The belief was that being buried in consecrated ground, or at least being stacked near a church, brought you a little closer to heaven, even if you had to share shelf space with half the village. Every skull had a story. Some were war casualties, others plague victims, many just unlucky enough to be exhumed first. All were equalized by time, dirt, and the occasional over-enthusiastic monk with a broom. Visiting an ossuary was a unique medieval experience. By candlelight, the space could feel reverent, awe-inspiring, and deeply unsettling. If you were a pilgrim or a local, it was a chance to contemplate the fleeting nature of life, and to remind yourself not to eat undercooked pork. For children, it was an early lesson in don't wander off, or you'll end up in the bone pile. For architects, it was proof that you can make anything beautiful with enough patience, elbow grease, and a liberal attitude toward human remains. The tradition continues, in a way. Modern visitors still flock to ossuaries and catacombs across Europe, snapping photos and buying postcards that say things like, "Wish you were here for eternity." And while most of us now prefer our interior decorating a little less skeletal, there's something undeniably mesmerizing about these ancient boneyards. So if your closet ever gets crowded, just be glad it's not stacked with the ancestors. Medieval ossuaries, where everyone finally gets to be part of the foundation. Sometimes, your remains end up fueling light for prayer, literally. Tibetan monks might use fat from the dead to keep butter lamps burning bright. So, even your afterlife has a side hustle. Picture yourself in the rarefied air of a Himalayan monastery, where clouds drift by at eye level and the wind always seems to carry a faint scent of yak. You've lived a good Buddhist life, meditated, chanted, tried not to step on any beetles, and now you're about to take part in one of the most unique afterlife recycling programs ever conceived. In Tibet, the boundary between body and spirit is thin, and the line between rest in peace and rest in grease can get a little blurry. You're not getting the average send-off. While most bodies might end up beneath the earth or floating as vulture food in a sky burial, there's another possible destination, the sacred butter lamp. These lamps aren't filled with supermarket butter or scented soy wax. They're crafted using animal fat, yak, sheep, or, in special cases, even the fat rendered from the deceased. If you're especially pious, or just particularly well marbled, parts of you might find new purpose lighting up the monastery's inner sanctum. Let's break it down. After death, your body is prepared according to Buddhist rituals with prayers and offerings as monks chant for your soul's peaceful journey. But the material world still has its needs. In Tibet's frigid climate, oil and wax are hard to come by. Enter the butter lamp, a simple clay or metal bowl filled with fat, with a cotton wick nestled inside. Light it, and you've got instant warmth and spiritual ambience, plus a direct line to enlightenment, at least according to the faithful. The lamps are everywhere, lining temple halls, clustered before golden statues, and illuminating dim, cave-like chapels. They're kept burning day and night as offerings to the Buddha, local deities and spirits. Each flickering flame is a prayer, a reminder that life is brief, but the soul's light continues. Sometimes, families will donate butter to keep the lamps burning for months, hoping their departed loved ones rack up enough karma points for a first-class reincarnation. But let's say your fat is chosen for the job. It's rendered down, purified by ritual, and poured into the lamp. Monks murmur, blessings as your earthly remains are transformed into golden, glowing light. It's the ultimate way to stay useful. Forget being just a memory, you're literally fueling enlightenment, one wick at a time. Even in death, you're contributing to the community. You might not get a tombstone, but your flame dances across painted walls and sacred texts, lighting the path for generations to come. Of course, not everyone ends up as a butter lamp. It's a rare honor, often reserved for highly respected monks or lay people with enough spiritual merit, or just an impressive body fat percentage. For everyone else, it's more likely their family will donate yak butter in their name. A less personal but equally luminous gesture. The idea behind the butter lamp is both practical and profound. In a landscape where resources are precious, nothing goes to waste. And in a worldview where all life is interconnected, the simple act of burning a lamp becomes a bridge between worlds. Your physical self fades, but your light endures, at least until the next round of yak butter comes in. So, if you ever find yourself wandering a Tibetan monastery, watching the lamps flicker in the dusk, you might just be witnessing a soul's last great gig. Enlightenment isn't just a metaphor here. It's an actual light bill, paid in butter and devotion. And as far as side hustles go, spending your afterlife illuminating the path to wisdom isn't a bad way to go. In parts of Papua New Guinea and the Amazon, eating bits of your relatives was the sincerest form of flattery. You are what you eat. Gets unsettlingly literal here. Hope you're well seasoned. Let's step off the beaten path and into the rainforest, where the air is thick, the parrots are loud, and funeral customs are, well, a little more personal than most. Among some indigenous peoples of the Amazon and Papua New Guinea, death wasn't just a time for mourning, it was a chance to make sure family bonds never broke, even if you technically had to chew on them. The practice? Endocannibalism. The recipe? Only those you love. The logic goes like this. When someone in your family dies, their soul lingers, hovering between the living and the spirit world. You don't want them to be lonely, forgotten, or wandering around the afterlife with unfinished business, especially if their unfinished business is nagging you about not visiting enough. So, what's the most intimate way to keep a loved one close? Eat a piece of them. Literally make them a part of you. It's family dinner, but with a little more existential weight. These weren't wild, savage feasts. They were solemn, ceremonial, and deeply respectful. The process often started with ritual preparation, songs, prayers, and careful division of the remains. There were rules about who could eat which part, how it should be prepared, and the proper etiquette. No elbows on the table. Don't fight over grandma. In some cultures, the bones would be roasted and ground into powder, mixed into a kind of soup or porridge, and shared with everyone in the family. In others, Specific organs or bits of flesh were eaten, all in the belief that the spirit and wisdom of the departed would live on through those they loved most. If you're picturing a rowdy bacchanal, tone it down. Imagine instead a somber meal, shared in candlelight or firelight, with everyone speaking in hushed tones, passing the bowl and remembering stories of the departed. Each bite was a blessing, a memory, a hope for spiritual protection. Endocannibalism wasn't about hunger, it was about honor, continuity, and ensuring that your family literally stuck together through thick and thin. For the 4 people of Papua New Guinea, the ritual even had a practical side. Everyone shared in the power and presence of the ancestor. Unfortunately, they also shared something else, a prion disease called kuru, sometimes known as the laughing sickness. Not exactly the family legacy anyone wanted, but a reminder that even the most heartfelt rituals can have unexpected side effects. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, except when it doesn't. Westerners, when they encountered endocannibalism, were usually horrified. Understandably, if your only reference point for eating relatives is a zombie movie. But for those within the tradition, it was no more odd than keeping a locket of hair or an urn on the mantelpiece. The body was sacred, and the act of consuming it was as meaningful as it was practical. Over time, missionaries, governments, and health officials discouraged or outlawed the practice, but the stories and spiritual reasoning linger on, tucked away in collective memory. Today, endocannibalism has mostly disappeared, replaced by more standard forms of remembrance, songs, carvings, photographs, or sacred places in the forest. But the idea endures, that love and family are not easily severed, and that sometimes being close to your ancestors means more than just visiting a grave. So, next time you're at a family gathering, passing the mashed potatoes and sharing stories, remember there are cultures where dinner was literally a family affair, where the past was present at the table, and forever in your heart took on a whole new flavor. If nothing else, it's proof that grief and love can take wildly creative forms, and that even the weirdest rituals are rooted in the universal desire to never, ever let go. Death doesn't have to be gloomy. In New Orleans, your send-off comes with brass bands, parades, and people dancing on your grave. If you've ever wanted your funeral to feel like Mardi Gras, you're in luck. Let's stroll down Bourbon Street, the sun gleaming off wrought-iron balconies, the air sticky with the promise of beignets and mischief. You've lived a life full of spice, soul, and possibly questionable decisions after midnight. Now, it's time to say goodbye, but not with the usual whispers and solemn organ music. In New Orleans, your last ride is more like a block party with a dress code. Black suits, feathered hats, and enough blaring trumpets to raise the neighbors, living or dead. Your loved ones gather at the church. But the mood is anything but grim. There's weeping, of course, and maybe a few tears behind big sunglasses, but everyone knows what's coming. The jazz funeral. It starts with a slow dirge, a melody so mournful you can practically feel your own ghost reaching for a handkerchief. The band marches out first, led by a trumpet's wail and the deep, steady heartbeat of a bass drum. Behind them, the main line, the grieving family and friends, move in somber rhythm, following your casket through the streets. But here's the twist. New Orleans funerals aren't just for the mourners. Anyone can join in. The second line, a crowd of neighbors, tourists, and anybody who feels the music, forms behind, waving handkerchiefs, spinning umbrellas, and grooving along. It's a rolling celebration, and the further they walk, the lighter the mood gets. The band plays Just a Closer Walk with Thee, the notes rising up to the balconies and swirling through Spanish moss. As the procession winds through the old streets, something magical happens. The tempo shifts, the beat picks up, and the mourning gives way to joy. Sadness turns to laughter, tears to dancing. Suddenly, it's a full-blown party. The trumpets blare, trombones slide, and the clarinet weaves through it all like a mischievous ghost. If you ever worried about being forgotten, don't. You've just become the star of the best parade in town. The casket is carried high, sometimes festooned with flowers, always surrounded by the living pulse of the city. Everyone is invited to celebrate, to mourn, to remember, and to dance. The line between life and death blurs with every step. Some people say the music helps guide your soul to the next world. Others say it just makes the leaving a little easier for everyone still here. After the burial, the party doesn't stop. The second line keeps marching, circling back through the neighborhood. Strangers become friends, and everyone's story is temporarily tangled up in yours. Vendors might sell gumbo or snowballs on the corner. The rhythm of the drums echoes through the city's old brick walls. Even if you're not a jazz fan, by the end of the day, you're humming along, your grief softened by syncopation and swing. Jazz funerals are about letting go, but also about holding on, to memory, to joy, to that impossible mix of celebration and sorrow that makes life in New Orleans unique. It's a final reminder that no one gets out of here quietly. Even in death, you're expected to keep the party going, at least until the sun sets over the Mississippi and the music fades into the warm night air. So next time you think about your final farewell, maybe skip the gloomy organ and opt for a brass band instead. In New Orleans, you don't just go out. You go out with a groove, a shout, and maybe, just maybe, someone dancing on your grave. Now that's what I call resting in peace. If you thought awkward family photos were bad, try holding a pose after you've died. The Victorians invented the original still life, literally propping up loved ones for one last portrait. No filter. Let's travel back to the candlelit parlours and foggy streets of 19th century Britain, a time when death was everywhere, but Instagram, mercifully, was not. If you lived through the era of Queen Victoria, you already knew life was short and unpredictable. Disease, accidents, or a really bad oyster could take you out before you could say cheese. But for the Victorians, remembering loved ones didn't mean just painting a portrait or keeping a lock of hair. No, they wanted something a little more photographic. Enter the age of post-mortem photography, a trend that bloomed as soon as cameras became widely available. Photos were expensive and special, so if you didn't get your picture taken while alive, your family made sure to get at least one after you'd shuffled off this mortal coil. It was both a memento and a coping mechanism. A last chance to remember the dearly departed, captured in a moment of perfect, if permanent, stillness. Picture this. The parlour is draped in black crepe. Mirrors are covered to keep stray spirits from wandering. And the photographer arrives with a trunk full of mysterious equipment. The deceased is washed, dressed in their finest clothes, often white for children, somber darks for adults, and arranged with loving care on a settee, in bed, or sometimes standing, propped up by elaborate iron braces. Family gathers close, faces solemn, eyes red from mourning, and, let's be honest, from trying not to blink during a 30-second exposure. For children, the effect was heartbreakingly sweet. Little ones arranged as if simply napping, surrounded by toys and flowers, their cheeks pinched for one last hint of life. For adults, the result was sometimes eerily lifelike, open eyes painted onto closed lids, a slight smile forced into stiff lips, or hands gently resting on a favorite book or pet. If you ever see a Victorian photo where everyone looks slightly too intense, check the corners. There's a chance someone isn't just holding their breath, but holding up the dead. The truly dedicated families took things up a notch, grouping the deceased with their living relatives for a final family portrait. Sometimes, the only way to spot the recently departed is to look for the person holding impossibly still. Helpful tip: it's usually the one with the sharpest focus. Occasionally, siblings would drape an arm around their late brother or sister. Mothers would cradle children in their arms, and proud fathers would clutch their son's limp hand. Talk about bonding for eternity. To modern eyes, it all seems impossibly macabre, maybe even ghoulish. But to Victorians, these images were treasures, displayed on mantles, tucked into lockets, sent to distant relatives who couldn't make the funeral. In a world before colour photos, FaceTime, or Snapchat, post-mortem photography was as close as you'd get to one last selfie. The photos provided comfort, proof that your loved one had existed, and a visual anchor for memory to cling to. Eventually, as photography became cheaper and people started smiling for the camera before they died, the trend faded away, replaced by the standard awkward family photo, complete with weird sweaters and forced grins. But if you ever stumble across a Victorian album in an antique shop, pause for a second and look for those perfectly still faces. Odds are, someone in there is sleeping the big sleep. So next time you're caught in a family group photo, cheeks aching and eyes glazed, remember, at least you're not being propped up by iron rods. The Victorians may have invented the ultimate resting face, but it's a tradition we're probably better off leaving in the past. Rest in peace and pose. In southern China, the Bo people hung their dead in wooden coffins on the sides of cliffs. Why? To get closer to the heavens, obviously. Or maybe just to keep nosy neighbours out of your afterlife. Let's step into the misty gorges of the Yangtze River, where limestone cliffs rise up like the teeth of ancient dragons, and the morning fog makes the world feel mysterious and wild. For centuries, the Bo people of southern China had a unique approach to death, one that combined gravity, carpentry, and a dash of architectural bravado. When your time came, you weren't just put in the ground or on a pyre. You were given a final resting place, so dramatic that even the birds had to pause and admire the view. Here's how it worked. After death, your family built you a sturdy wooden coffin, simple, strong, and, ideally, waterproof. No velvet cushions or ornate carvings, just something that could handle the weather, and maybe a few curious monkeys. Then came the real challenge, hauling the coffin up a sheer cliff face, often hundreds of feet above the valley floor. It took ropes, pulleys, ladders, and most likely a great deal of encouragement from below. No pressure, just the knowledge that if anything went wrong, you'd be rolling into the afterlife a little sooner than planned. Why all the effort? For the Bo, getting your coffin off the ground was about more than showing off. It was a statement of faith and family pride. High up on the cliff, you were closer to the sky, the ancestral spirits, and, hopefully, the better real estate in the afterlife. You were out of reach of scavengers, floods, and any particularly persistent mother-in-law who still had opinions about your housekeeping. It was the ultimate do not disturb sign. Each coffin was wedged onto a ledge, wedged into a crevice, or suspended on thick wooden stakes driven into the rock. From a distance, the cliffs looked like gravity-defying galleries, rows of weathered boxes perched at impossible heights, each one a testament to the dedication and arm strength of the living. Some coffins have remained in place for over 1,000 years, surviving earthquakes, typhoons, and generations of local teenagers daring each other to climb a little higher. But this wasn't just about individual glory. The placement of sky coffins was a communal event, drawing entire villages together in a mix of grief, celebration, and logistical debate. Priests performed ceremonies, incense curled through the air, and children stared wide-eyed as their elders hoisted great-grandpa into his final penthouse suite. It was as much about bringing people together as it was about sending one person off. There was even an element of ancient social climbing, quite literally. The higher your coffin, the more respect you earned. If your family could secure a spot on a particularly treacherous ledge, it meant you'd made it, both in this world and the next. On the other hand, a low-hanging coffin might invite a few raised eyebrows and perhaps some awkward posthumous family gossip. Of course, this gravity-defying custom wasn't without its challenges. Every so often, a coffin would break loose, tumbling down the cliff and sending generations of ancestors on an unexpected reunion tour. Local legend has it that some cliffs are still haunted by spirits, annoyed about their sudden change of address. The practice eventually faded as the Bo people were absorbed by neighbouring cultures and new beliefs took root. Today, the sky coffins remain as silent, weathered reminders of a society that wanted to keep its dead safe, respected, and maybe just a little bit out of reach. So, If you ever worry about where you'll end up, just be glad your relatives aren't scaling a cliff with a wooden box and a prayer. The Bow people's sky coffins, for those who always dreamed of a room with a view, and for families who weren't afraid to go the extra mile, straight up. In Mexico, the boundary between life and death gets very blurry. Families gather for Dia de los Muertos to picnic with their ancestors, decorate graves, and eat sugary skulls. For once, death is actually a party. Let's take a stroll through a Mexican town at the end of October. The streets are bursting with color, marigolds everywhere, papal picado fluttering overhead, and the scent of fresh bread and incense weaving through the air. It's Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, and you're about to see what happens when a culture decides to make death not just tolerable but joyful. Instead of whispering in graveyards, families show up with picnic baskets, blankets, guitars, and enough food to feed 3 generations, living and dead. The idea is simple and beautiful. Once a year, the souls of the departed are invited back home for a visit. But unlike your typical surprise drop-in from relatives, everyone is genuinely happy to see these guests, even if they are a little see-through. Altars, or ofrendas, spring up in living rooms and cemeteries, laden with photographs, candles, bottles of tequila, and mountains of pan de muerto, a sweet, soft bread topped with bone-shaped dough. There are sugar skulls everywhere, grinning from tables and windows, ready to be eaten by children or used to mark a favorite spot on the family altar. Preparation starts weeks in advance. People scrub and paint gravestones, string marigold petals into garlands, and hunt down the perfect bottle of mezcal for Uncle Alfredo's ofrenda. Some families even hire mariachi bands to serenade their loved ones' spirits at the cemetery. You're supposed to share your favorite foods, drinks, and memories, just in case the afterlife's menu is running low on mole and tamales. The message is clear: you may be gone, but you're never forgotten. Not as long as someone remembers your favorite snack. The mood is anything but gloomy. Children dart between the graves, faces painted like skulls, part spooky, part adorable. Elders tell stories, some true, some suspiciously exaggerated. The air is filled with laughter, music, and the soft glow of candles flickering against the night. For a couple of days, cemeteries become the liveliest places in town. It's less mourning and more reunion, a time to catch up on old gossip, pass down family legends, and maybe sneak an extra shot of tequila when nobody's looking. At the heart of it all is the belief that the dead aren't really gone. They're just away, waiting for an invitation to join the fun. That's why everything on the altar is something your loved one enjoyed. Cigarettes, hot sauce, even the crossword puzzle they never finished. You want them to feel welcome, to stick around for the stories, and maybe give you a little luck for the coming year. Some people even sleep at the gravesite, just to be sure they don't miss a single ghostly guest. Of course, there's also plenty of symbolism woven into every bite and song. The marigold petals, cempasúchil, are said to guide the spirits home, their bright colour and scent lighting the way from the other side. Sugar skulls remind everyone that life is sweet, but fleeting. Skeleton costumes poke gentle fun at the idea of death, because when you're laughing, you're not afraid. The result? A celebration where nobody is left out, and the line between this world and the next is as thin as a tortilla. You leave the cemetery with sticky fingers, a full heart, and a renewed sense that family is forever, even if some members are now mostly just bone and memory. So, next time you find yourself feeling somber about mortality, remember Dia de los Muertos. There's no better way to honor your ancestors than with music, flowers, and a plate piled high with their favorite food. Death may be inevitable, but in Mexico, it's also an excuse to throw the best party on both sides of the grave. The Chinchorro of South America were early overachievers in the let's not decompose department. They started mummifying their dead thousands of years before the Egyptians, using mud, sticks, and pure stubbornness. Let's drift back in time, way before Cleopatra, the Great Pyramids, or even the phrase "as old as dirt" had a chance to become cliché. It's about 5000 BCE on the misty, wind-battered coast of northern Chile and southern Peru, and you're a Chinchorro fisherman. Life is hard, catching fish, surviving the Atacama Desert, and inventing new uses for whatever the Pacific Ocean decides to wash ashore. But death? That's where the Chinchorro get creative. In a world where most ancient people said a quick goodbye and moved on, the Chinchorro refused to let go. When a loved one died, they didn't just bury them. Instead, they launched into a ritual that can only be described as prehistoric arts and crafts, an afterlife project so hands-on that it makes modern scrapbooking look like a lazy Sunday. The goal? To keep family members around, visibly, permanently, and, most importantly, well preserved. The process started by carefully removing the flesh from the bones. Yes, this sounds like something out of a Halloween special, but it was all about respect. The bones were dried and reinforced with sticks, reeds, and sometimes even llama wool. Basically, if it could hold up a spine or support a jaw, it got the call. Once the skeleton was stabilized, the Chinchorro would put the body back together, sometimes stuffing it with grass or ash, sometimes even using clay to rebuild what time or hungry animals had taken away. Now for the fun part, the skin. Sometimes, the original was carefully dried and reapplied like a macabre leather jacket. Other times, new skin was fashioned from animal hides or even painted clay. Faces were rebuilt with extraordinary care, features painted with manganese or red ochre, eyes wide and haunting. The finished mummies often looked more like surrealist sculptures than anything you'd expect from an ancient civilization. If Instagram had existed, the hashtag DIY mummy would have been absolutely trending. These mummies weren't tucked away in secret tombs or hidden behind elaborate walls. Oh no. The Chinchorro kept their mummified relatives close, sometimes in homes, sometimes right next to the fire. It was a way of staying together, of letting ancestors watch over the family, and of turning death from a final goodbye into a sort of ongoing family meeting. Talk about never letting go. Imagine trying to sneak in after curfew, only to find 3 generations of your ancestors staring you down from the living room shelf. Children, adults, the elderly, even babies were given the full mummy makeover. It was an equal opportunity afterlife, and the sheer effort involved says a lot about how deeply the Chinchorro loved their kin. The ritual, while a bit spooky by modern standards, was all about respect, connection, and ensuring that nobody, no matter how small, was left out of the family story. And all of this happened thousands of years before the Egyptians so much as looked at a pyramid blueprint. The Chinchorro weren't trying to impress any gods or secure a spot in some gilded afterlife. They just wanted to keep the people they loved close enough to attend dinner, supervise chores, and provide, shall we say, constant moral support. Today, archaeologists still marvel at these ancient DIY projects. Some of the oldest mummies in the world are Chinchorro, their faces still painted, their limbs carefully reinforced, their stories echoing down the millennia. And if a little stubbornness and ingenuity could keep your memory alive for 7,000 years, maybe that's the best afterlife insurance policy of all. So next time you wrestle with a flat-pack bookshelf or lose your temper at a glue gun, just remember, the Chinchorro managed to mummify an entire village with nothing but mud, sticks, and a love that refused to fade. Now, that's commitment. Ancient Rome, always practical, invented funeral clubs. Pay your dues, get a guaranteed send-off, and maybe avoid having your relatives sell your body for parts. Imagine a Costco membership, but for the afterlife. Let's step into the bustling streets of Rome, where gladiators duel, philosophers debate, and everyone is just a little bit obsessed with public baths. Here, in a city where death is as common as olive oil, you want to make sure your final journey is handled with a little more dignity than, say, ending up in the Tiber, or as a freebie for the local medical students. Enter the Roman Funeral Club, the world's earliest, weirdest, and arguably most useful membership program. It all starts when you realize that funerals, like everything else in Rome, are expensive. Want a nice shroud, a procession, a bit of music, and maybe someone to cry loudly at your grave. That costs serious denarii. But what if you're just a regular Roman, no villa, no senator friends, just a small apartment, and a dream of not being left out in the cold? For you, the Collegium Funeratitium has your back. Pay a modest monthly fee, show up to a couple of meetings, and voila, your burial is sorted. These funeral clubs were more than just insurance policies. They were social hubs, part support group, part afterlife planning committee. You'd meet in smoky taverns or modest temples, surrounded by merchants, freedmen, artisans, and the occasional former gladiator. Dues went into a communal pot, and when a member died, the club sprang into action, organizing a funeral, paying for the grave goods, and sometimes even providing mourners to ensure you didn't make your last exit to the sound of awkward silence. There were perks too. Members got access to club banquets, holiday feasts, and the kind of gossip you can only get from people planning their own send-off. Want a slightly fancier tombstone? Pool your resources and pitch in for a group mausoleum. Fancy a commemorative plaque? There's a guy for that. If you were lucky, your club would even stage an annual parade, marching through the streets with banners, torches, and enough solemnity to impress the neighbours and remind them to pay their dues. The funeral itself was handled with surprising care. You'd get washed, dressed in your best toga, and laid out with coins for Charon, the ferryman of the dead. The club would see to it that you received proper rites, sacrifices, prayers, a little food and drink for your journey, and maybe even a flute player if the budget allowed. Afterward, the club might host a commemorative meal, giving your friends and family a chance to raise a glass in your honour and remind everyone that, yes, you were paid up this year. And if you missed a payment, well, things could get awkward. Ancient Rome wasn't big on free rides. If you fell behind, the club could, and sometimes did, dock your benefits or kick you out entirely. There's nothing quite as motivating as the thought of being booted from the afterlife club and left to the not-so-tender mercies of your relatives, who might be tempted to repurpose your grave plot for next week's barbecue. Beyond the practical, funeral clubs offered something deeper: community. In a sprawling city, where you could easily become anonymous, the Collegium gave people a sense of belonging and a guarantee that, in death, they would not be alone. You might not have made the history books, but thanks to your club, you'd get a name on a wall, a candle on the altar, and the comfort of knowing that someone would show up to say goodbye. So next time you cringe at annual dues or grumble about gym memberships, remember the Romans, always practical, occasionally extravagant, and never willing to leave their send-off to chance. Roman funeral clubs, because even in ancient times, it paid to be a member. Mourning jewellery made from the hair of the dead. Wear your loved one around your neck, on your finger, or woven into a tasteful bracelet. Creepy or comforting? Yes. Welcome to the foggy lanes and black-creeped parlours of Victorian Britain, where death is not just a personal tragedy, but a whole social season. Here, every loss comes with a cascade of etiquette rules, shopping lists, and the perpetual question, how best to display your sorrow for maximum effect. If you guessed by keeping a physical part of your deceased loved one as an accessory, congratulations, you've unlocked the most sentimental and slightly unsettling trend of the 1800s. Hair jewellery. It sounds like something straight out of a Gothic novel, and honestly, it sort of was. Victorians didn't see hair as just something to brush or complain about on a humid day. They saw it as a physical manifestation of the soul, the part of a person that could last forever, even after the rest had shuffled off this mortal coil. So when death came knocking, and it did, frequently, they snipped, clipped, and preserved locks of hair from mothers, fathers, siblings, spouses, even babies. Then, in an act of devotion, they transformed it into wearable art. The process was both painstaking and oddly creative. First, you had to gently clean and treat the hair. This was not a job for the impatient. Victorian ladies, or sometimes professional hair weavers, would braid, curl, and twist the strands into elaborate designs. Everything from simple locks tucked into lockets to full-blown landscapes made entirely from human hair. Rings, brooches, bracelets, watch chains, and even intricate wall art, the options were only limited by the length of the deceased's hair and the patience of their relatives. If you're imagining a room full of weeping mourners hunched over tiny scissors and tweezers, you're not far off. Hairwork was considered both a craft and a calling. Magazines published patterns and how-to guides. Shops specialized in supplies and commissioned pieces. If you wanted a bracelet woven from your grandmother's hair entwined with your own, or a brooch spelling out a secret message in the language of flowers and follicles, there was someone who could make it happen. And it wasn't all about sadness. Some pieces were given as tokens of affection while people were still alive, best friends swapping curls, lovers exchanging braids before a long journey. But the real explosion in hair jewelry came with the Victorian obsession with mourning. Queen Victoria herself made black crepe and sentimentality a national pastime after the death of Prince Albert. And soon everyone wanted to show off a little piece of someone they'd lost. Wearing a hair locket around your neck let the world know you were devoted, and also, maybe, not to be messed with. Victorian mourning was competitive, after all. Your cousin might have a tasteful brooch, but you? You had an entire bouquet of hair flowers pinned to your bodice. If Pinterest had existed, it would have been an endless scroll of sepia-toned updos and macrame rings. For the less artistically inclined, you could always order a custom piece from a jeweler. Some shops even saved leftover hair from their regular clients, just in case. Imagine the 19th century version of a rewards program. Collect 10 locks, get your 11th locket free. To us, the whole thing might sound a little, well, hair-raising. But to Victorians, it was a tangible connection, a way to keep someone quite literally close to your heart, even after they'd gone. It was part art, part love letter, part coping mechanism, and, for some, a handy excuse to never throw anything away. So next time you find an old lock of baby hair or a forgotten braid in a jewelry box, just remember, you're following in the footsteps of a tradition that turned grief into art, loss into fashion, and hair into a surprisingly sturdy form of emotional support. Creepy or comforting? Still, yes. Some Aboriginal groups preserved their dead by smoking them over a fire, turning Grandpa into the world's oldest beef jerky. He's always with you, especially at barbecues. Let's step softly into the sun-baked landscape of ancient Australia, where the land is red, the trees are twisted, and tradition runs deeper than the oldest river. Among the many Aboriginal groups whose histories stretch back more than 50,000 years, death was not a quick goodbye but an ongoing journey, one that sometimes involved a lot more smoke than your average family reunion. When someone died, especially if they were a respected elder, the family didn't just bury them right away. Instead, the community launched into a set of mortuary rituals as rich and varied as the land itself. For some groups in northern Australia, this meant preparing the body for a special sort of preservation: smoking. Forget about ancient Egyptians with their resin and linen. Here, the mummification method was pure Aussie ingenuity. First, the body would be carefully cleaned, anointed with ochre, that beautiful red earth paint, and wrapped in layers of bark or leaves. Sometimes, possum or kangaroo skins made an appearance, because nothing says eternal rest like being snug as a bug in a rug. The body was then placed on a raised platform or in a forked tree, safely away from scavengers, curious dingoes, or overly ambitious ants. Here comes the smoky part. Beneath the platform, a slow-burning fire was lit, not so hot as to cook, but just enough to dry out the flesh over days or even weeks. The smoke preserved the body, keeping insects at bay and gradually turning Grandpa from dearly departed into something resembling artisanal jerky. During this period, family and community gathered, sang songs, told stories, and made sure the spirit's journey continued smoothly. The aroma of wood smoke mixed with eucalyptus and earth would drift through the camp, a constant, gentle reminder that the ancestor was still present. This wasn't just a practical solution to a hot climate and enthusiastic wildlife. The smoking process was deeply spiritual. It gave the deceased time to transition from the world of the living to the dreaming, the Aboriginal spiritual realm, where ancestors walk the land and shape the world. The smoke itself was seen as a vehicle, carrying the soul skyward and helping guide it safely home. Once fully preserved, the body didn't go straight to the ground. No, for months or even years, the smoked ancestor stayed with the family. Sometimes, the body was carried from place to place, attending ceremonies and witnessing important events. Imagine showing up to your cousin's naming ceremony with Grandpa in tow, not so much a guest as a chaperone from beyond. The presence of the ancestor offered protection, wisdom, and a powerful sense of continuity. Eventually, when the time felt right, determined by the elders, dreams, or signs in the land, the family would hold a second, final burial. This was another ceremony, often as big and important as the first, marking the true release of the spirit. The body, now dry and smoke-cured, was buried in a special place. A hollow tree, a cave, or a secret spot known only to the initiated. There, Grandpa would rest, his journey complete, finally left in peace, at least until the next family cookout gave people ideas. These rites, practiced for thousands of years, were a testament to Aboriginal Australians' deep connection to land, kin, and spirit. Every part of the process, smoke, song, ochre, fire, tied the living and the dead together, ensuring that no one was ever truly lost. In a world where closure is something people read about in books, here, the ancestors really did remain with you, watchful, fragrant, and occasionally in need of a good airing out. So the next time the smell of wood smoke drifts by on a warm evening, think of Australia's smoked ancestors, guardians, guides, and the world's most dedicated family members. Eternity never smelled so memorable. Death in Siberia isn't just a journey, it's a full-on road trip for the soul. Expect drumming, chanting, and possibly a side quest involving reindeer. The afterlife better have good snow tires. Picture yourself in the endless expanse of Siberia, where winter lasts 11 months. The wind is always up to something suspicious, and neighbors are more likely to be bears than people. You've spent a lifetime braving blizzards, herding reindeer, and listening to the wisdom of shamans who know how to speak with spirits and negotiate with the weather. When you finally shuffle off this icy mortal coil, your next adventure is just beginning, and it's about to get metaphysically complicated. In Siberian shamanic tradition, death is not a hard stop, but a challenging trek from this world to the next, full of cosmic detours and supernatural toll booths. The body stays put, but your soul? It's about to embark on the Siberian equivalent of the world's wildest overland expedition. You'll need a guide, and that's where the shaman comes in. A spiritual travel agent with a drum instead of a ticket, and a wardrobe heavy on fur and feathers. The funeral itself is a community affair. Family, friends, and every eligible reindeer gather around the yurt or log cabin. The shaman, wrapped in layers of animal skins and sporting a hat that looks like it lost a fight with a bird's nest, takes center stage. He, or sometimes she, starts the ceremony by lighting fires and sending smoke up to the sky, texting the spirits that something big is happening. Then the drumming begins, deep and relentless, pounding out a rhythm that's equal parts heart, hoofbeats, and supernatural GPS. As the drum beat pulses, the shaman chants, sings, and calls on guardian spirits, animal helpers, and the souls of the ancestors to come help with the journey. You might hear stories, see symbolic dances, or watch as the shaman mimics the flight of a bird or the gait of a reindeer, showing your soul which direction to head. If you were important or particularly beloved, or just owed a lot of people money, there might be special songs and extra rounds of drumming, just to make sure you don't miss your connecting flight to the afterlife. The body itself is prepared with care, washed, dressed in warm furs, because no one wants to arrive in the next world with frostbite, and sometimes sent off with gifts, food, tools, weapons, and tokens to bribe the spirits or pay the tolls on the other side. In some communities, The body is placed in a tree, on a platform, or in a shallow grave, all designed to keep it out of reach of hungry animals and wandering ghosts. And yes, the reindeer might get involved, sometimes as spirit guides, sometimes just as very confused bystanders. One of the most important parts of the ritual is the shaman's trance. Through drumming, chanting, and possibly a little herbal encouragement, the shaman travels into the spirit world, seeking your soul and helping it past any obstacles. These obstacles might include rivers of ice, spirit wolves, jealous ancestors, or that one particularly grumpy ghost who always hated company. The shaman negotiates, battles, and sings you through every step, like a cosmic AAA service for lost souls. The journey doesn't end with the funeral. The living continue to honor the departed with yearly feasts, offerings of food and drink, and maybe a little leftover vodka for good measure. Stories are told, drums are beaten anew, and everyone hopes the departed is warm, happy, and not stuck in afterlife traffic. So, if you ever worry about where you'll end up after death, just remember the Siberians. They'll drum, chant, and dance you all the way to the next world. And if you see a reindeer along the way, ask for directions. They've probably done this trip before. In Siberia, even the afterlife is an adventure. And, honestly, it sounds like a journey worth taking. Today, you can donate your body to science, have it turned into a plastic model, and spend eternity standing in a museum next to a fake dinosaur. Congratulations, you're immortal, at least until the exhibit closes. Let's fast forward to the 21st century, where death is no longer just about burial plots, solemn hymns, or an awkward family gathering with too much potato salad. No. Now you have options, high-tech, high-gloss, and just a little bit weird. Enter plastination, the modern miracle of turning your once living flesh into an eternal, anatomical action figure, ready to educate, amaze, and, occasionally, deeply unsettle museum visitors and field-tripping middle schoolers. Here's how it works. When you donate your body to science, perhaps because you want to skip the traditional send-off, or you've always dreamed of being more educational in death than you were in life, the process begins with good old-fashioned preservation. Instead of mummification or cremation, your body gets a spa treatment straight out of a sci-fi movie. The water and fats in your tissues are gradually replaced with liquid plastics, silicone, polyester, or epoxy resin, until you are, essentially, perfectly preserved from head to toe, with a finish somewhere between medical model and Madame Tussauds on a budget. But it doesn't stop there. After plastination, you're carefully posed. This is not your grandmother's casket nap. You might find yourself caught mid-stride, swinging a golf club, throwing a javelin, or striking a yoga pose. All in the name of education, of course. Suddenly, your muscles, nerves, and organs are on full display, color-coded and labeled for the benefit of anyone curious about what, exactly, goes on inside the human body. If you spent your life avoiding gym class, don't worry, at least you'll finally have abs. You might end up on a world tour. The most famous plastinated body exhibits, like Body Worlds or Bodies, the exhibition, have circled the globe, drawing crowds who line up to stare at their own mortality, conveniently organized by organ system. Kids gape, doctors take notes, and everyone spends at least a few minutes nervously wondering how fresh that plasticized smile really is. Your afterlife suddenly comes with a lighting technician, a velvet rope, and an audio guide explaining your gluteus maximus in 3 languages. Not all plastinated remains live out their days in museums. Some become permanent fixtures in medical schools, helping future doctors learn anatomy without the whole cadaver smell issue. Others might grace university classrooms or science centers, doing their bit to further the cause of education. You're no longer just a person. You're a 3-dimensional textbook, a lifelong teaching assistant, and the unexpected star of the skeletal system chapter. There's a strange dignity to it, maybe even a dash of immortality. Long after the last family photo has faded, and your old Facebook page is nothing but a digital ghost town, your plastinated self will be standing tall, eternally poised and ready for the next wave of the curious. There's no risk of grave robbers, no chance of flooding, and zero chance you'll be late for roll call in the afterlife. Of course, not everyone is on board with the idea. Some find plastination off-putting, preferring their final curtain call to involve a little less plastic and a lot more peace. And there's always the possibility that, decades from now, your plastinated self will end up in a dusty storeroom next to a fiberglass walrus and a box of forgotten dioramas. Immortality, it turns out, can be a little hit or miss. Still, for those who crave adventure, or just want to stick around long enough to see how weird the future gets, modern plastination offers a unique ticket to the afterlife. Whether you're educating med students, inspiring curious kids, or just keeping a plastic eye on the crowds, you'll never really be gone. At least, not until the museum changes its display. So, next time you walk through a science museum and see a plastinated figure waving from behind the glass, just remember, someone, somewhere, chose this afterlife. And who knows? Maybe they're secretly thrilled to finally get some attention. No embalming fluid required. In medieval Europe, body parts of saints, bones, fingers, even tongues were traded like rare Pokemon cards. Visit a cathedral, touch the holy femur, hope for a miracle, and try not to think too hard about where the rest of the saint ended up. Let's wander through the misty streets of a medieval city where the church bells toll, the air smells faintly of incense and livestock, and everyone knows that spiritual power can be found in the oddest places, like a glass case containing the left kneecap of Saint Ignatius. For the medieval faithful, death was not the end. It was a chance to get famous. The holiest men and women didn't just earn a place in heaven. Their bodies, now deemed relics, were transformed into the hottest commodities on the continent. The rules of the game were simple. The holier the person, the more potent the relic. A single finger bone from a famous saint could draw crowds, inspire pilgrimages, and, if you were lucky, heal the sick or make a well-timed rainstorm. Cathedrals and monasteries competed fiercely to claim the most impressive collection. Some went so far as to acquire relics from rivals, resulting in late-night heists that would put any modern art thief to shame. Relics were everywhere, tucked into altars, displayed in elaborate reliquaries, and paraded through the streets on saints' days. Even the smallest parish church might boast a sliver of bone or a fragment of robe, just enough to boost the town's spiritual and economic profile. Visiting a relic was a full-on event. Pilgrims from across the land would journey for weeks or months, enduring rain, mud, and medieval cuisine, all for a chance to kneel before a gilded bone and whisper a prayer. Some hoped for healing, others sought protection from plague, war, or bad harvests. And for the especially pious, there was always the hope of a miracle, a child saved, a wound healed, or at least a better spot in the afterlife queue. The more gruesome the relic, the more famous the shrine. There were heads, hearts, entire skeletons, and even the odd jawbone or two. In Rome you could visit the chains that once bound St. Peter. In France, a whole chapel was built around the supposed arm of Mary Magdalene. The really rare stuff? That was reserved for the big cathedrals, chunks of the True Cross, the Holy Grail, possibly, and enough pieces of saints' skulls to assemble a small football team. If you think medieval people lacked a sense of humour, remember that some monks delighted in pointing out how, according to the relic lists, at least 4 different towns claimed to have St. John's head. Behind all this lay a booming relic economy. Relics brought in pilgrims, and pilgrims brought in cash, donations, offerings, and the medieval version of souvenir shopping. Churches became experts at marketing. Miracle stories were carefully recorded, the best relics displayed front and centre, and the local bishop always ready with a tour and a blessing for a suggested donation. Of course, some cities grew rich on the trade. Others, less scrupulous, dabbled in a little forgery, animal bones, old shoes, or creative carpentry, sometimes passed off as sacred treasure. But who was going to check? Medieval CSI was not yet a thing. The relic craze got so intense that church authorities had to step in, establishing strict rules on authenticity and sometimes excommunicating those caught in the relic racket. But even with regulations, the market thrived. Relics were a bridge between heaven and earth, offering comfort, hope, and a tangible link to the divine. And if a few toes or teeth went missing along the way, well, sharing is caring. Eventually, the cult of relics mellowed, though many treasures remain on display in churches across Europe. So next time you see a glittering reliquary or an oddly specific saint's day, remember, medieval faith was never afraid to get a little hands-on. And somewhere, a saint is probably still wondering where his femur ended up. For those truly terrified of death, there's always cryonics. Have your body, or just your head, frozen in hopes of a scientific resurrection, the ultimate gamble, the afterlife, but with a subscription fee and a very cold bed. Let's imagine you're a forward-thinking individual in the 21st century, someone with a little extra cash, a healthy fear of mortality, and maybe too much faith in the power of science fiction. You're not satisfied with traditional burials, funerals, or the prospect of becoming worm food. No, you want a shot at the future, and you're ready to put your body, or at least your brain, where your hope is. Enter the frosty, faintly sci-fi world of cryonics. Cryonics is the practice of preserving human bodies, or just heads, for those on a budget, at ultra-low temperatures, in the hopes that one day, medical science will figure out how to bring you back, cure whatever killed you, and maybe even give you a robot dog. The process is as elaborate as it is chilly. First, you sign up with a cryonics provider. Think gym membership, but with fewer treadmills and more liquid nitrogen. You pay your fees, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes more. It's the ultimate bet on the future, one that comes with fine print, annual reminders, and the occasional awkward conversation with your family. When the time comes, meaning when you're legally dead but not too far gone, your body is rushed by a team of technicians who would look right at home in a NASA lab or a particularly committed ice cream shop. They work quickly to cool your body, replace your blood with a series of antifreeze chemicals, no really, and prep you for long-term storage. If you've only paid for the head-only plan, congratulations, you're about to be decapitated for science, and your skull is getting its own frosty pod. After all the prep, you're tucked into a giant thermos-like dewar, submerged in liquid nitrogen, and left to wait out the centuries. No light, no sound, just an endless, silent slumber at minus 196 degrees Celsius. There are no dreams, no memories, just the vague hope that somewhere, sometime, a scientist will stumble upon your icy remains and say, "Hey, let's see if this works." The good news? No risk of grave robbing, embalming mistakes, or being haunted by your own tombstone. The bad news? You're paying rent for a freezer the size of a small apartment. Family and friends are, naturally, divided. Some see it as a brilliant leap of faith, the logical next step after organ donation and just-in-case life insurance. Others think it's a very expensive, very cold form of denial. But the cryonics movement rolls on, with companies in the US, Russia, and beyond offering their own take on the eternal deep freeze. You can even arrange for your pets to come along, just in case Fido wants to see the year 3000. Will it work? No one knows. Cryonics is, at heart, the ultimate optimism, trusting that science will not only catch up with death, but do it in time for you to wake up, shake off the freezer burn, and learn how to use whatever technology the future has cooked up. The risks are obvious. Freezer malfunctions, forgotten payments, or the small matter of whether your cells will resemble soup after decades on ice. But hey, hope springs eternal, even when everything else is frozen solid. So next time you worry about what happens after you die, remember, in the modern world, you can always buy yourself a little more time, or at least a chilly spot in the history books. Cryonics. For those who prefer their afterlife with a little extra frost, a dash of science fiction, and the faint hope that immortality is just a thaw away. In the windswept villages of old Tibet, death wasn't just about where your body ended up. It was about making sure your spirit didn't wander back to raid the family pantry. Enter the spirit trap, a homemade web of string, beads, and yak hair meant to snare any restless soul on its way out. It's part security system, part dream catcher, and just a little bit home alone for the afterlife. Let's drift up into the thin, cold air of the Tibetan plateau, where mountains scrape the sky and every breeze sounds like it might be carrying ancient secrets. Or maybe just your grandma, if you don't pay attention. Here, life is hard, death is ever present, and the line between the spirit world and your breakfast table is thin enough to make anyone paranoid. So, what's a family to do when their dearly departed seems just a little too attached to the world of the living? You break out the craft supplies, of course. When someone dies in a Tibetan village, it's not just the body that demands careful handling. Spirits are considered slippery customers, tricksters with unfinished business, or just a bad case of FOMO, fear of missing offerings. Monks and lamas perform prayers to guide the soul onward, but for extra insurance, the family puts together a spirit trap, or drelwa. Picture a rustic spiderweb strung across a doorway, window, or even directly above the deceased. Woven from yak hair, brightly coloured thread, and beads, it's equal parts sacred tool and home decor. Martha Stewart would be proud, if a little confused. The goal is simple: keep the soul from turning around and haunting the house, or, even worse, getting stuck and turning into a local mischief maker. The string web acts as a supernatural obstacle course. Should a restless spirit try to sneak back in for a midnight snack, it'll get tangled in the web, distracted by the beads, or just plain annoyed into moving along. It's like putting bubble wrap on your soul's shoes, no sneaking allowed. But the spirit trap isn't just about containment, it's also about compassion. Tibetans believe that spirits can get lost or confused after death, and a trap isn't just a no trespassing sign. It's a way of gently steering them toward the next world, making sure they don't linger, mope, or worse, start rearranging the furniture from beyond the grave. Monks will chant, families will offer incense and butter lamps, and, in some cases, the spirit trap becomes the focus of a ceremony to release the soul after a set number of days. There are local variations. In some places, the traps are woven large enough to hang above the main entrance, so every spirit, and probably a few nosy neighbours, knows they're not welcome back without permission. In others, smaller traps might be hidden near the bed, under a favourite chair, or wherever the deceased liked to hang out. Yes, even the kitchen. Sometimes, the spirit trap is burned or buried after the ritual, sending the message that it's time to move on, no forwarding address. This tradition is rooted in the Tibetan worldview, where everything has a spirit, and nothing ever disappears completely. It's a culture built on respect for ancestors, awareness of karma, and the constant presence of the unseen. The spirit trap isn't about fear so much as balance, keeping the living and the dead in their proper lanes, and making sure that nobody, no matter how much they loved Mum's dumplings, sticks around longer than they're supposed to. Today, you'll still find spirit traps in remote corners of Tibet and among Tibetan communities around the world. They're a reminder that, in a place where the physical and spiritual worlds overlap, a little homemade magic goes a long way. Plus, it's proof that when it comes to the afterlife, sometimes the best defense is a good net. So if you ever worry about unwelcome guests from beyond, take a page from Tibetan tradition. A little string, a few beads, and a sprinkle of yak hair might be all you need to keep the peace, both in your house and in your soul. Why leave your ancestors alone in their tomb when you can throw them a party every 7 years? In Madagascar, the Famadihana festival means exhuming your relatives, rewrapping them in fresh shrouds, and literally dancing with their bodies to the sound of live music. If you've ever wondered what a family reunion would be like with more skeletons and fewer potato salads, this is it. Let's journey to the rolling highlands of Madagascar, where the earth is red, the hills are dotted with zebu cattle, and the people are preparing for a celebration like no other. The air is electric with anticipation, Distant drums echo through the rice fields, and the village is abuzz because it's time for Famadihana, the turning of the bones. It's not just a ritual, it's the ultimate ancestral after-party. Here's how it works. Every 5 to 7 years, families gather at the ancestral tomb, but instead of laying flowers or whispering solemn prayers, they come armed with festive clothes, baskets of food, bottles of rum, and a full brass band. It's a full-blown family reunion, except this one comes with a shovel and a lot of dancing. The day begins with music and laughter. As living relatives approach the tomb, crack open its stone doors, and bring their ancestors back out into the world. The remains, sometimes just bundles of bones, sometimes still wrapped in woven shrouds, are treated with absolute reverence and genuine joy. Each ancestor is carefully dusted off, greeted with hugs, stories and tears, the happy kind, and then rewrapped in fresh silk or cotton cloth. The old shrouds, faded and worn, are replaced as a gesture of respect and renewal. Imagine changing Grandpa's pajamas, but with more drums and significantly higher stakes. But the real highlight? The dancing. With the ancestors swaddled and looking their best, the whole family parades around the tomb in a swirling, exuberant conga line. Everyone joins in. Elders, children, even the slightly embarrassed teenagers. The air is thick with the smell of roasting meat and sweet rum, and the sound of singing rises into the sky. Some relatives will hoist the ancestor bundles high, spinning and twirling as if to make sure the dead don't miss a single beat. It's the only time you'll see skeletons waltzing, no coordination required. Why all the effort? In Malagasy belief, the spirits of the dead aren't gone, they're just a little out of reach, always watching over the family. But if you want their blessings, good harvests, healthy children, peace in the home, you have to keep them in the loop. Famadihana is a way of reminding the ancestors that they're loved, cherished, and never forgotten. In return, it's hoped that the dead will intervene on behalf of the living, ensuring luck and harmony until the next big bash. It's not all party hats and no problems, though. The tradition comes with its own etiquette. No disrespecting the ancestors, no dropping the bundles, and definitely no using the occasion as a chance to settle old family arguments, at least not where the dead can hear. Sometimes, if a family can't afford new shrouds or a proper celebration, they'll wait until the next cycle, because if you're going to do Famadihana, you do it right. For outsiders, the idea of exhuming loved ones might sound unsettling, even macabre. But for Malagasy families, it's a powerful affirmation that love endures across time, beyond death, and yes, even through the occasional awkward two-step with a great uncle. The line between past and present blurs, and for a day or two, everyone, living and dead, comes together to celebrate the bonds that never break. So next time your family reunion feels awkward or boring, spare a thought for Madagascar, where dancing with your ancestors isn't just encouraged, it's tradition. Famadihana, proof that the greatest parties are the ones where everyone shows up, even if some guests are a little more bone than skin. In 1920s, America and Britain, people finally realized their pets deserved the same afterlife amenities as the local banker. Enter the era of pet funerals, complete with tiny coffins, custom tombstones, and more flowers than your average wedding. Dogs, cats, parrots, even the occasional goldfish all got send-offs that would make any human slightly jealous. Rip, Sir Wigglebottom, let's take a stroll through the roaring 20s, where jazz fills the air, skirts are getting shorter, and everyone who's anyone is dancing the Charleston. But the wildest trend isn't happening in speakeasies or smoky jazz clubs. It's taking place in newly minted pet cemeteries, nestled on the edge of town. After centuries of being mostly ignored or, at best, getting a shoebox burial in the backyard, beloved animals were suddenly living and dying in style. Why the shift? Part of it was the changing status of pets. As cities grew, animals like dogs and cats went from working the farm to lounging on velvet cushions, wearing tiny sweaters and occasionally sipping champagne, or at least licking the leftovers. With prosperity came sentimentality, and soon people were willing to spend real money to ensure their furry companions got a send-off fit for a family member. All dogs go to heaven might have been a promise, but in the Jazz Age, it came with a monogrammed casket. Pet funerals became a bona fide industry. Picture a stately hearse, sometimes a converted Model T, trundling through town with a wreath of lilies on the hood and a procession of weeping owners in tow. Pet undertakers, yes, that was an actual job title, offered deluxe services, embalmings, paw print mementos, and personalized eulogies that would have made Shakespeare weep. The whole affair was conducted with somber dignity. After all, you wouldn't want the neighbours thinking you'd cheaped out on Fluffy's final bow. Pet cemeteries popped up everywhere. The Hartsdale Pet Cemetery in New York, founded in 1896 but booming by the 20s, became a hotspot for society's four-legged elite. Marble angels, engraved bones, elaborate headstones, some reading Beloved Friend, others with flowery prose that would embarrass a Victorian poet, soon dotted the rolling green hills. If your dog had saved a child from a burning building, or your parrot had outlived 3 generations, there might even be a statue in their honour. One famous headstone simply read, Rex, faithful to the end. Snored like a freight train. And let's talk flowers. Jazz Age pet funerals often rivaled human ceremonies for sheer floral abundance. Carnations, lilies, roses, every local florist could count on a rush order whenever Mrs. Willoughby's Pekingese passed away. Mourners gathered, not just to shed a tear, but to reminisce, swap stories, and occasionally throw shade at that one cat who never liked anyone, not even in death. The human-animal bond reached a level of eccentricity that only the 1920s could manage. Pets got their own obituaries in the newspaper. They were remembered in family albums, honoured in annual memorial services, and, in some cases, left generous inheritances in their owners' wills. Some lucky dogs and cats still own more real estate than the average millennial. Was it all a bit much? Maybe. But in an age of rapid change, social upheaval, and relentless jazz, there was something comforting about giving the family pet a proper goodbye, a sense of continuity, a little tradition to hold on to, and of course, one last reason to gather everyone together, hats and black armbands optional, but encouraged. Today, pet funerals remain a thing, but the Jazz Age version holds a special place in history. A time when every animal, no matter how small, was promised a resting place as grand as any mausoleum. So the next time you walk through a park and spot a tiny headstone, tip your hat and hum a bit of Gershwin. Somewhere, Sir Wigglebottom is napping eternally, surrounded by lilies and dreaming of endless belly rubs. During Europe's Black Death, death rituals had a dress code. Big black robes, a wide-brimmed hat, and, most iconic of all, a terrifying beaked mask stuffed with herbs. The plague doctor wasn't there to heal you so much as to officiate your departure from this world in the creepiest costume imaginable. Nothing says rest in peace like being serenaded out of existence by someone dressed as an evil stork. Let's stagger through the narrow, cobblestone streets of 14th century Europe, where the sweet smell of rosemary and vinegar battles, unsuccessfully, the stench of the world's worst pandemic. The Black Death is sweeping the land, and with it, all the usual customs around death have been turned upside down, shaken vigorously, and sprayed with odorant. Bodies pile up faster than anyone can count. And your odds of a normal funeral are about as good as finding hand sanitizer on clearance. Enter the plague doctor, history's least reassuring healthcare professional. When you see one on the street, robes flapping, cane in hand, eyes glinting behind glass goggles, and that iconic beaked mask looming overhead, you know things are about to get dramatic. The mask is stuffed with herbs, spices, and sometimes just anything vaguely pleasant-smelling. Lavender, mint, cloves, even a dried orange or two. The theory? If the air can't get through, neither can the plague. The reality? You get a medical professional who looks like a bird that's about to file your taxes. If you were unlucky enough to die during the plague, your final journey would probably look a little less peaceful farewell and a lot more biohazard cleanup with extra drama. Family members might not be allowed near you. The local priest was probably in quarantine. Instead, it's the plague doctor who oversees your last rites, standing at a safe distance, voice muffled by beak, reading prayers or reciting verses in a voice that's equal parts somber and echoing like a bad phone connection. The process was practical, rushed, and utterly surreal. Plague pits were dug on the edge of town, lime was scattered, and bodies were laid out in rows. No fancy coffins, no marble angels, just a sea of hastily dug graves and the endless parade of black-robed, bird-masked figures shuffling from house to house. The ceremony was over in minutes, just enough time to wave a cane, say a blessing, and maybe scribble a note for the authorities to keep tally. If you were very important, maybe you got a marker. Otherwise, your legacy was being part of history's grimmest group project. For the living, the sight of a plague doctor at the door was a guarantee that things had gone from bad to might as well make a will. But in a way, these eerie figures did serve as a symbol of hope, albeit a weird, nightmare fuel kind of hope. They were the only ones willing to get close, however heavily disguised, and their strange get-up at least tried to provide a sense of order in a time of pure chaos. Of course, the beaked mask lives on today as the ultimate death ritual costume. Every Halloween, every Renaissance fair, and every pandemic-themed meme owes something to the original plague doctors. For centuries, their image haunted art, literature, and anyone unlucky enough to remember those desperate, mask-filled days. So next time you see a plague doctor mask hanging in a costume shop, remember, it's not just a quirky accessory, it's the echo of a time when death came calling, and the person answering the door looked ready to deliver both last rites and a package from Amazon. In the end, the Black Death changed everything, rituals, grief, and even medical fashion. And if there's a moral to the story, maybe it's this. When life gets terrifying, don't be afraid to accessorize. So tonight, as you settle into your bed, a bed that is, miraculously, not made of straw, bones, or the collected hair of your relatives, take a moment to let gratitude, and maybe a slight shudder, wash over you. You survived a journey through humanity's strangest farewells, sky burials, Viking pyres, mummified uncles, and parties with the dearly departed. Along the way, we met families who danced with their ancestors, priests who collected bones like baseball cards, and people who faced the afterlife with everything from jazz bands to frozen heads in a lab. It's easy to laugh at the absurdity, and let's be honest, history is hilarious in all the weirdest places. But every ritual, every strange tradition was born out of the same hope, that life meant something and that death didn't have to be the end. Whether it was a butter lamp flickering in a Tibetan monastery or a second-line parade in the streets of New Orleans, every culture found its own way to keep the memory alive. Sometimes literally, sometimes plastinated, sometimes just perched on a cliff. So next time you grumble about an awkward family funeral or sigh at another bad eulogy, remember, at least no one is planning to turn you into a lampshade or a party favor. Maybe, as you slip into sleep, you'll spare a quiet thank you to your ancestors, who endured everything from flaming boats to being mistaken for dinner. Because history proves people are stubborn, creative, and frankly, a little bit ridiculous. Tonight, rest easy, knowing your biggest worry is snoring too loud, not being launched off a cliff. May your dreams be free of beaked doctors, chatty skulls, and hungry vultures. Good night, sleep tight, and may your afterlife many, many years from now be far less dramatic.